So recently I got asked how much was the quality difference from doing the dynamic active stabilization on the ZV-E1 to the active stabilization, especially because when you use the dynamic active stabilization, it tends to crop in a little bit to obviously stabilize the footage in camera. So it got me kind of curious to know if it was that much of a difference that you would want to get a ZV-E1 kind of style, or if you'd be fine with like a Sony A7S III or the other cameras that have active stabilization so that you don't lose so much quality. Especially because I tend to use the dynamic active stabilization fairly often if I know I'm going to be doing a lot of walking kind of type of content, especially if my wife is following me the camera, just to have a little bit of more stabilization within this camera rather than sometimes using my Sony A7S III. But it kind of just made me think about the difference in quality. And as well, I want to test out one more thing that I think could be interesting to know is if I would just go ahead and match it and post the dynamic active stabilization crop to this one with the active stabilization, and then maybe apply some warp stabilization to see if it can achieve the same outlook and see if it matters that much. So without further wasting any more time, we're gonna go straight to the testing so you can see how they look, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put it in post what I need to do and speak about what I found and, well, maybe we found together in this moment, because I'm genuinely curious to know what's gonna happen. We're trying to film, but there's a dragonfly, so her priorities change. One of the reasons why I'm doing it this way, guys, is because I'm not gonna do movement right now. It's just so it's accurate for the imaging. So we have over here a little bit of that crop into it. This is how it looks with the active stabilization, dynamic active stabilization, and here is on the big screen. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and do the active to active so you guys can see them side to side. And now we are seeing both of them side to side right here. We got the Sony A7S III on the left, ZV-E1 on the right. So you can see both of them at the active stabilization, the steady shot that they have. So you can see how it'll be, and that way we'll kind of go from there. And I'm gonna do one more test here shortly so you guys can see a little bit of movement with it. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead now and do the footage for the active stabilization with this to follow her or go up to her. And then from there, I'll do the dynamic active the same way as much as possible, just to have it in frame as much the same to be able to kind of do it in post. So here we go. This is with the active stabilization. So I'll stay as put as possible. There we go. So I'm gonna take 3 steps. I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3. And now that you've seen the examples and we are done reviewing the footage from the dynamic active stabilization to the active stabilization, how much quality might have, differentiated between the both, as well as using the crop method with the warp stabilization, well, now you have that answer for you to see if it, made a difference. I think everything about this is going to be more subjective because as I was somewhat pixel peeping, I didn't really notice a massive difference between the dynamic active stabilization of the ZV-E1 to the active stabilization with the Sony A7S III. I mean, if you want to tinker with it a little bit further in a sense, that you want to find comparisons, you will. That's sadly kind of how everything of this will always go. I don't think Personally, most people will notice a major difference, especially if they don't do anything with camera. So if you're doing it for client work and for other people, I genuinely don't think they're gonna notice a major difference whatsoever, or even a slight difference, to be honest, if you put it side to side to them, and they just will see a difference in crop, and that's pretty much it. So when it comes down to that, for me personally, I think you'll be fine having the dynamic active stabilization to play as your somewhat of a gimbal whenever you're trying to do more movement and you want to have some stabilized footage, so that you can compensate if you don't want to bring a gimbal without still losing quality. The only difference will be is it's cropping internally more digitally to have that stabilization, which, like I said, for me personally, I didn't notice a major difference to make it that much of a, I guess, an issue when it comes down to that comparison. Now, is it something that you can use with the crop after and then after warp stabilization? Maybe not, because I mean, for me personally, it's not because it maybe not doesn't work or anything like that. It's just a lot more tedious work. That is it really worth it? More than likely it is not. Can you do it? Yeah, you can. It's just you might have to kind of clean up the image a little bit more after it to make sure that, you know, the warp stabilization on like Premiere Pro works perfectly fine. So at the end of the day, it's just more how much work are you willing to put? Are you wanting to be fine with having a little more shaky footage with the active stabilization and not worry about having to add warp stabilization after? Or at that point, are you going to just use a gimbal? Or are you fine with going with the ZV-E1, which is a smaller camera, a little bit more inferior obviously than the Sony A7S III. There's a reason why it's cheaper. The build, the one SD card slot, you gain some new features that they came up with this one that they never put into this one. So at the end of the day, you kind of have to decide, am I willing to go ahead and, you know, just go ahead and pay the, I think it's like $2,200 that this camera can be, versus the $3,500 of the Sony A7S III, because I want to have the dynamic active stabilization. That's going to be your decision ultimately for that. But for me, I love both cameras for different reasons, especially if I know I'm going to be going for a quick little shoot, especially for YouTube videos, for behind the scenes vlogging kind of style. This works perfectly, as well with stabilizing my footage as I'm on the go. With this one, it's more like the workhorse kind of type of camera when I'm needing to have more of, I know it's going to be just more me behind the camera filming and kind of holding onto it for more of the reasons, rather than setting it up on a tripod or me doing some filming or having my wife film me with this one, since the weight of it is just a little bit nicer distributed for her as well. So ultimately, what's going to be the consensus of this video is just that it's a little bit subjective, but for me personally, after pixel peeping a little bit more than I usually would, I genuinely could not see a major difference that it would be unusable to use the dynamic active stabilization. And I'm pretty sure, you know, Sony knew that going into making this, because maybe you might lose a little bit of resolution to a certain degree, but nothing crazy amount that it would make sense. So I'm fine using the dynamic active stabilization when it comes down to the ZV-E1, and as well the active stabilization, whether I use it on the ZV-E1 or the Sony A7S III, you know, and all the other Sony cameras that they have, and just use it to the best of my ability. It's really how well your hands will be. For me personally, you might have noticed in the videos, I'm not always the most stable whenever I'm having to walk and take those, like, you know, the footage itself. So the dynamic active stabilization helps out a little bit to just stabilize myself, because yeah, I'm not gonna be the best at the, you know, kind of like the ninja walk, the slow steps and everything. So I'm okay with, you know, losing quote unquote a little bit of screen real estate to be able to use the dynamic active stabilization. But what do you think? And when it comes down to the dynamic active stabilization, are you willing to give up a little bit of, you know, that crop real estate into the camera to stabilize your footage in camera, or are you wanting to do it in post? Let me know your comment down below, and I would love to know your thoughts on that. But with all that said and done, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe to this video with a friend. I'll catch you guys on the next one. See ya.